Today I'm going to be walking through a prompt that's gone relatively viral over on Twitter, and I'm going to be showing you how you can actually extrapolate out from this and improve your usage of artificial intelligence overall, and indeed your personal productivity and your professional productivity as well using artificial intelligence. So the particular tweet was just retweeted by Greg Brockman. Greg Brockman is the president and co-founder of OpenAI, so fairly important in the AI world. He has just retweeted a prompt and he's saying it's a self-improvement prompt for Codex. Now, that's not quite right, but the fact that this has been tweeted, the fact that this has been shared, I think it's worth having a look at. And what this is a prompt that's going to allow us to work better with artificial intelligence. So I'm going to hop over to the actual tweet, and it's by a guy called Vaibhav Shrivastava. Sorry if I'm butchering your name, really sorry, but it's a very cool prompt. So he has put together this prompt, which is to help you work better with AI, specifically by having it self-improve. So what it's going to do is it's going to go back and ask Codex to look through your sessions, memories, and chronicle, identify patterns, reuse what already exists, and only create the smallest useful skill, sub-agent, or automation. So what it's going to do is basically look at all the work you've been doing over the last month and try to work out what the recurring tasks are. Try to work out what tasks you take to artificial intelligence again and again and again, and then it's going to work out how best to deal with that on a recurring basis. So if you have a workflow that you keep on an ad hoc basis using an AI for, we're going to go back and we're going to optimize all of that, make it work much better. So they're talking about using this with Codex. We can use this with any AI, and I've done some testing this morning. We can definitely use it in Claude Code. We can use it in Claude. We can use it in ChatGPT. So not just the Codex. Indeed, any artificial intelligence that you're using, this is a really useful prompt. I'm going to quickly run through what the prompt says, but I'm not going to spend too much time on it because I'll give that to you in the newsletter. Or if you're watching it later on YouTube, check below the video and there'll be a link and you can get the full prompt. This is not my prompt. This is a prompt by a guy called Vaibhav, sorry, excuse me, but I think it's a good one. So it starts with look back over my recent work from the last 30 days or all available history if shorter, and identify repeated manual workflows worth packaging. Obviously, you have to have your history turned on for whatever AI tool you're using. Then use available evidence in order. Recent Codex sessions and task summaries, Codex memories and rollout summaries to find patterns repeated across sessions, Chronicle, if enabled, to spot repeated work outside Codex, use Chronicle for discovery only, existing skills, custom agents and automations, so basically doing an audit, so you reuse or extend what already exists instead of duplicating it. Again, he's talking about Codex. We can use this in ChatGPT, we can use this in Claude, we can use this in Claude Code, doesn't matter. Look broadly for work that is repeated, time-consuming, error-prone, context-heavy, or benefits from a consistent process. Include workflows across coding, research, writing, planning, communication, operation, analysis, and personal administration. So kind of everything. Only act on a potential for workflow automation if it has occurred at least twice or is clearly likely to recur and costly to repeat, has stable inputs, a repeatable procedure, and a clear output or stopping condition, would materially improve speed, quality, consistency or reliability, is not already covered. And then choose the smallest appropriate form. This is for creating the automation, either a skill, which is a reusable workflow or playbook, a custom sub-agent, a bounded specialist role or investigation task suitable for delegation, an automation, or skip. So if it's too ambiguous, sensitive, or poorly evidenced, don't do it. I'm going to give you this in the newsletter so you can use it yourself. This is the full thing here. Really good little prompt. You can use in Codex, you can use in ChatGPT, you can use in Claude, you can use whatever you want. But I want to extrapolate a bit out from this and talk more broadly about how we can use artificial intelligence to improve our manual workflows. We start with this prompt, but this is a much bigger topic. So what you need to do, and this is so important, is what I see a lot of people doing with artificial intelligence is they hear about these kind of cool ideas for what they can automate, and then they rush off and automate things that don't really need automated. What you need to do is you need to start with an audit of what you personally do, either personally or professionally, or both, most likely. You need to look for things that are actually important to your work. So don't just create a weekly update or a recurring scheduled like research task or automate certain types of email if it's not something that you actually need to do. You need to start with your real work. So I see lots of people automating things just because it's kind of cool. And they've seen a viral tweet, they've seen somebody building, I don't know, an obsidian second brain or whatever, and they're like, oh, I want to do that. That is the wrong way to do it. That is putting the cart before the horse. You need to look at what you actually need to get done first, and then automate it, then consolidate the workflows using artificial intelligence. So important. Don't do it for the sake of it, but do it because it's actually going to be valuable for your work or for your personal life. So what we're going to do is we need to audit what we are doing on a weekly basis. Now, obviously, the prompt that I've just showed you from Vaibhav is really good if you are collecting everything inside of your AI. If you're already talking to your AI about certain workflows, about certain topics, great. Then this prompt here is going to capture those, and it's going to be able to package them into a skill, into an agent, into an app, or whatever it needs to be. That's fantastic. But what if you are not using AI for this process, and it's still a process that is taking you hours every single week that should be automated with AI? What we need to do is we need to widen our scope. So I know this is very crude, but you can get a pen and paper and throughout the week kind of note down what you're doing on a daily basis. Doing it with pen and paper, or if you must, your to-do list electronic, that allows you to capture everything that you're doing on a daily basis, everything that you're doing on a weekly basis, everything that you're doing on a monthly basis. That is far more impactful than asking AI what you should automate, because this means you're going to capture the things you don't know that you can capture with AI and automate with AI. So go back and look at all of the stuff you've done. If you keep a work journal, if you keep a timesheet or anything like that, go and have a look at that. Rather than just asking the AI, look at your reality. And what we're going to be looking for are things that take up a lot of time, things that you do on a repeated basis. Let's say a task, for me, it's something like bookkeeping. I have to do it once a month. I get sent a sheet by my business partner and I'm like, oh no, not again. That is something I find really frustrating. I have to do it every single month and it takes me a long time to do. Plus people are waiting for me. So that's a perfect example. But when I realize that that's a task that can be automated, boom, I'm going to go straight to AI. So that's just an example. You need to think through your own workflows. This is another problem I see, is when people try to automate, they try to build an AI workflow for something that doesn't really need one. I have been guilty of this myself, and anyone who likes to fill around with code and tweak with things, I'm sure you are guilty of this too, is coming across a problem, coming across a task that you want to do and immediately being like, ooh, I bet I can use AI for this. And then spending more time building an app, building an agent, building whatever it is you need to solve the problem, spending more time doing that than if you've just gone and done the task. Only automate, only create workflows if it's a task that's going to be done again and again and again and again. It has to be repetitive. Otherwise, doing workflow automation on an ad hoc task is a waste of time. If it's a one-off, don't do it. Also, look for something that has a similar input and a similar output with similar steps each time. You need to have a general purpose workflow, a general purpose automation that you're going to be able to run repeatedly, and it's just going to be able to work consistently, rather than you having to each and every time start tweaking with it in order to get the right results, because again, you're just going to be wasting time. It has to be something that can be reduced to the same inputs and outputs, and ideally with the same process in the middle. It has to be consistent, otherwise there is no point automating it. And then skip it if it's too messy, if it's rare, if it's something that's, once it comes up once a year, probably not worthwhile. And if it's too personal to you, so if it requires a lot of your input, it requires you to tweak and change things, again, probably not worth automating. So what we're going to do is, yes, we have this prompt, which is a really good one. It will be in the newsletter and it will be available below this video later. But you can also use AI to interview you about your normal week, your normal month, and use that to extract things that can be automated. So we're going to put your AI into interview mode. This is one of my favorite ways to use AI. I basically say to it, I need you to ask me a bunch of questions to help me get the thoughts out of my head and into a coherent format. So we're going to ask something like, hey, ChatGPT, hey, Claude, ask me questions about my last 7 to 30 days of work. Help me spot things I repeated, delayed, copy and pasted, or explained more than once. Then help me decide what is worth turning into a reusable prompt, checklist, template, automation, or smaller tool. Let's go ahead and do it on mine. I'm going to put it in thinking just because I want it to be a bit faster. And it's going to go back and look at my history. Hopefully it's always a risk when you're doing live. So that's going to go ahead and look for things. It's looking for work patterns in particular. And because I have memory turned on, it's going to be able to search and go through all the stuff we've done before. Okay, so I'm going to let that surface patterns for me. So I'm going to let that go ahead. I recommend doing something like this yourself though. Cool. And then, so we'll see, here we go. Let's go ahead. First, the obvious repeat loops that I can already see. You've probably repeated work around slide decks for live streams. Yes, every single morning I come and say, hey, I need a new live stream. The reason I do this still in the graphical user interface is because the API version, the direct connection version of the image model for ChatGPT is trash. It's much better inside of the graphical user interface. So that's the reason why. This is 100% something I could turn into a skill. And now that I'm looking at this, now that I'm talking to you live, I'm thinking, I'm an idiot. I should have automated that. I should have turned that into a skill. Turning messy source material into public explanations. AI tells and humanize a past, removing phrases like it's not X, it's Y. So this is something that I have built a skill for, an AI tells skill, which will go through and get rid of awful things like this. It's not X, it's Y. Systems diagrams, reels, covers, and carousels asset, explaining technical tools to non-technical people. Ooh, this is an interesting one. So often when I have a topic that I want to talk about and I want to shoot a short video for Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, I will come on to ChatGPT and I'll say, looking for a good way to explain what an API is. I'm looking for a good way to explain what a GitHub repo is. Help me. So this is something that I could build into a little piece of software for myself where I just plug in what I need and it goes off and formats it in the style that I need. So that works. Repurposing, yep, exactly. All right, so now questions. So again, we're in interview mode. If I was not on the live stream, I would use my microphone and I would answer these questions verbally. The reason is that you remove the self-editing and it allows you just to get a lot of information out. So it's asking things like, what did you write, explain, or brief more than twice? What topics keep coming back in different forms? What did you have to re-explain because the first version was too vague, etc. So I would go through and fill this out, talk to ChatGPT about this and give it all the information that it needs. This is quite extensive. I would probably go quickly through this. And then at the end is giving me a bunch of reusable assets. So it's saying, for the AI with Kyle deck builder prompt, you should build it into a prompt or a template. You make a lot of public decks with a consistent style. So that is what I could create. For the AI tell screening checklist, it's saying make a checklist. I disagree with that. I'd actually make a skill and have it invoke the skill. What are the other ones? System diagram generator, could create a tool or a prompt for that. Repurposing map, create a checklist. I have actually done that to provide to my team. So it's immediately given me different things that I can actually build, which leads us nicely into what we're going to be talking about in a moment, which is what are the different formats that we can use to capture our repetitive tasks. Let's have a look at that. The key here is you do not need to make an AI agent. You do not need to make a full-fledged SaaS application for every single one of your reusable tasks. If you can do the work faster, more efficiently, and better using a simpler method, use the simpler method. So I've got a bunch of different possible fixes here. They're kind of in order here, but obviously there's going to be gray areas between them. But if the repeated thing is the same kind of answer, so you want the same kind of output coming from your AI, then you'd probably just have a reusable prompt. This is as simple as having it in, an Excel file or a Word file and being able to copy and paste. That is a very basic way to save your work. You just have a reusable prompt. Very simple, nothing technical about that, and you're just going to copy and paste it in each time. If it's the same steps each time for a particular process, you can improve on that slightly by having a checklist that you provide to your AI saying, hey, here's a task that I want to do. I want to do my bookkeeping. Here's a checklist of where you're going to go and check all the information you're going to get, how you cross-reference them, what you're going to format, you're going to put them in. Here's a checklist. So again, a checklist is basically we have a standard operating procedure sitting inside of a Word document, a Notion document, a Google Doc, doesn't matter, that we are going to copy into our AI, or we can connect it if it's something like Google Docs and say, you're going to run through this process for me. Very simple. Same with template. That is going to be more in the formatting. So if you have a report that follows a certain template, you're going to provide that template. If you have a design that's following a certain template, you're going to provide that template. But these are all things that you can create using AI to save for later. Then we have getting more complicated things like automations. So if there is something that does require connecting to lots of pieces of software and taking an input, running it through these different pieces of software and creating some kind of output at the end, then we would create an automation. Now, there's a whole bunch of different ways to do that. Simpler ways are things like Zapier, or make.com is great. I really like make.com. There is also N8N, which is another way to create workflow automations. So at this point, these are getting more complicated, and you can see this is an example of an N8N automation. You can see this particular example, somebody drops in a form. So one of your customers drops in a form, maybe a request for a quote, for example. That goes to an AI agent. It's grabbing some stuff from a database here. It's talking to Claude, doing a bunch of other things. It's opening a Jira ticket by the looks of it. And then it has some decisions and it pings off to different chats. This is an example of an N8N automation. And you can see this is already getting a lot more complicated. Or if it is a task that's going to continue running inside of your AI, you could create an agent. There are managed agents in Claude. So this is something that is sitting inside of the cloud, a Claude managed agent. So this is something that sits in the cloud and it runs processes for you. And these are easier to create than you might think, because you're just going to talk to your AI and say, hey, how do I turn this process into a managed agent? How do I turn it into an automation? They allow you to deploy sub-agents, which can run on schedules. So there are lots of different ways to do this. And then finally, at the end, if it is a process that you don't necessarily want to call on AI every single time, you could actually build a script, which is just some snippets of code that run through a process. It could be a bit of Python, for example. Or you could build an application, so a small app that is just going to do this one task for you. You don't need to build a whole Salesforce. You don't need to build a whole SaaS off the back of it. But you could have an application that is sitting on a server in something like Railway, for example. And every time you trigger this process, it's going to go off, do the work for you, and then return the solution. So these are all different ways. And they're increasing in complexity, increasing in power, but you do not need to go to the most complex to solve a simple problem. You do not need to build an AI agent if a checklist would do the job for you. If you can make a checklist in a Word doc, copy and paste it in, and have an AI run a process, and you need to do that once a week, that's fine. There is no need to build like a self-improving agent that lives in a managed cloud, etc. That's overkill. Fit the fix to the job itself. Yeah, so you do not need a giant system. Just because you see people on building these massive obsidian brain vaults, which are connected to managed agents and OpenClaw and Hermes and all of this kind of good viral sounding stuff, you do not need to do all of that. You need to remember that we are solving problems. We are building workflow automations. We are doing generally quite boring things. It does not need to be sexy. It just needs to get done. Super, super important. So just because we can do all of this cool stuff does not mean we should. And in fact, you will spend all of your time building cool, sexy stuff if you allow the creep to set in. All we're interested in is what did I do this week that I will probably do again? That's it. And how can I use artificial intelligence to help me to make that more efficient? If you start there, you're going to be in a good position. So don't get blinded by all the technology. Don't get blinded by all of the viral tweets you're seeing. Just focus on what it is you actually need to do in your personal, your professional, your business life, and get that done using artificial intelligence. Most people are just getting distracted. Most people are getting overwhelmed, but instead you're going to do the work that needs to be done. Okay, hopefully that was useful. And as always, this is going to be in the newsletter. So I'll give you the slide deck. I'll give you a PDF with this prompt. Again, it's not my prompt. It's from a guy called Vaibhav, or you can go and find it on Twitter. But it's a good prompt, and I've been using it this morning, playing around with it, and I think it's worth you checking out as well. Cool, I'm finishing up. Thank you so much, everybody. Make sure you're signed up at aiwithkyle.com. Also, the edited, tidied up version of this video will be, or the presentation will be on AI with Kyle on the YouTube channel. We've just hit 30,000 subscribers, so thank you so much for that. That's really, really cool. And you can find all of the tidied up versions plus the resource guides over on YouTube, so make sure to subscribe there as well. Cheers, guys.